Okay, so last time we talked about the two things that phytoplankton need to survive, right, which are light and nutrients. Those are the two limiting resources. So whenever you don't have a lot of light or a lot of nutrients, then that will limit the amount of phytoplankton that you can have. And phytoplankton, the light is located at the surface of the water. The nutrients are located deeper in the water. So they're in a little bit of a conundrum. They need those nutrients in order to survive. And so the only way that they can get those nutrients in order to be able to survive and to grow and reproduce is to have some sort of breakdown of that thermocline to allow the nutrients to come up. Okay? And that happens in wind. So when wind creates currents and creates like equatorial upwelling, you can get nutrients brought up to the surface. You can also get overturn. Okay, so remember when we talked about overturn? When you get more dense water on top of less dense water, and you get that dense water sinking down and the less dense water coming up. So you can get seasonal temperature changes, which will cause density mixing of the water, overturn. And then you can have upwelling. Okay? Upwelling is the movement of the deep water to the surface. You can have wind upwelling like we talked about at the coast. So when the wind blows out to sea, it pushes that top surface layer of water out and pulls water up from the deep, bringing nutrients up. Or you can have geographic upwelling. Okay, that's where you have these big currents at the bottom of the sea moving along. And sometimes those big currents hit seamounts. And when those hit seamounts, that seamount forces the current to come up towards the surface, bringing nutrients with it. And so it brings nutrients up to the surface. Let me draw a picture of that for you. So here's our seafloor, here's our seamount, okay, and then here's the surface of the water. So your current, deep water current's moving along the bottom, and when it hits the seamount, it gets forced upwards, and so it brings nutrients up, breaks through this thermocline that way. All right? Okay, so it's called geographic upwelling. Okay, so you can have different kinds of what we call production. And production is just simply an increase in the number of individuals of the phytoplankton. Okay, increase in the number of individuals. So we have new production and regenerated production. Regenerated production occurs when the thermocline is present. So regenerated production just simply relies on the small amount of nutrients that you have above the thermocline. And that small amount of nutrients, because there's only a little bit, means that there will be small phytoplankton populations, because there's only enough nutrients to support a small population. Okay, so regenerated production relies on nutrients that are already above the thermocline. New production occurs when the thermocline is absent. So if you have upwelling that's occurring, okay, or overturn that's occurring, you can get new production. Okay, and new production relies on nutrients that are brought up from the deep. And so because there's lots of nutrients in the deep, lots of nutrients means lots of phytoplankton, so you can have large population sizes with new production. Yeah, does that make sense? Okay. So the population sizes are large with new production. So when that thermocline breaks down and when you get new production, you get this thing that we call a bloom, okay, a phytoplankton bloom. Okay. Here's a picture to show you the difference between new and regenerated production. So regenerated production, remember this green line right here, that's the thermocline. Regenerated production relies on nutrients above. New production is when new nutrients come up from the bottom. So a bloom, okay, is a large increase in the phytoplankton population. Large increase in phytoplankton population. It will only occur when their thermocline is absent. Okay? And that means that you'll have lots of nutrients and lots of sunlight. So as long as you have lots of both of the limiting factors, you can have a bloom of phytoplankton. Blooms always begin as new production, and then they typically drop off once you have So it's thermocline forming and trapping the nutrients in the deep sea again. You have different bloom patterns depending on where you are on Earth. Okay, so the tropics, the poles, and the temperate regions will all have different blooming patterns of phytoplankton. And here's what we mean when we say the tropics and the temperate regions and the poles. So here's our world. Okay, let's redraw this. A whole new world, yeah. Okay, here's our world. It's a little lumpy, but it's okay. Okay, and so we use latitude and longitude in order to be able to describe where on Earth people are or where a location is. Okay, and so 0 degrees latitude is the equator. Okay, so latitude goes like north and south, and longitude goes east and west. So 0 degrees latitude is the equator. Okay, and then the very, very south pole would be 90 degrees south, and the very, very north pole is 90 degrees north. Okay, and so every line of latitude in between 0 and 90, so going south is going to be like 1 degree south, 2 degrees south, 3 degrees south, 4 degrees, so on and so forth, right? All the way down to 90. And then you've got 1 through 90 degrees north. Okay? So a couple of lines of latitude that you need to be familiar with are 30 degrees south, okay, and 30 degrees north. Okay? In between 30 degrees north and south, that's the region of the Earth we call the tropics. Okay? And then in between 30 and 60 degrees north and south, those are the regions that we call the temperate regions. Okay? And then anything south or north of 60, those are the poles. All right? Okay, so let's look at the bloom patterns in the tropics. And you will want to draw these pictures because these pictures are those last 2 questions on your 5.2 homework. Okay, so I'll show you what you need to draw. But in the tropics, so light is always available because it's sunny, it's warm, it's the tropical regions. That's where everybody goes to vacation. There's not much of a difference between winter and summer, right? It's year-round, sunny and warm and lovely. So that means that light is always available, so light is not going to be the limiting factor for phytoplankton in the tropical regions. Okay? What is going to be the limiting factor is nutrients. Okay? And nutrients are always limiting because there's a permanent thermocline. So permanent thermocline in the tropics means nutrients never come up, which means you actually never get a bloom of phytoplankton in the tropics. Okay? So here's what you need to draw. Okay? So you need like this, okay? And this axis on your graph is going to be the population size of the phytoplankton. And then this is your bottom one, and you can divide that into your 4 seasons. Okay? Autumn and fall, winter, sorry. And then all you need for the tropics is like a straight line because you have no bloom that occurs, so there's no large increase in population size, and the populations of phytoplankton remain low year-round. Okay, so it'll look something like this. See that? So spring, summer, fall, winter, straight line, population size, that's the tropics. Yeah? You see that? So no bloom of phytoplankton in the tropics. All right. Yes, they do. All right. Poles are a little different. So in the poles, you have nutrients always available because cold water holds more nutrients. You get more mixing of the water that occurs because of differences in density. And so you have nutrients always available. However, light is only available in the poles from late spring to early fall. Okay? Late spring to early fall. So that means where those 2 overlap, late spring to early fall, you get a huge summer bloom of phytoplankton. So you can draw this actually. same way that you would draw the other one, with your seasons along the bottom and your population size, and then you get a big increase in phytoplankton during the summer. You see that? So big increase. This phytoplankton bloom that occurs in the poles in the summer is actually why whales migrate to the poles. So every year whales migrate to the poles in order to be able to feed on the phytoplankton and zooplankton that are living there. So you get a big bloom of phytoplankton in the summer, and it's weird. It's weird that like blooms of these little teeny tiny microscopic plants drives the migrations of some of the biggest animals on Earth. So crazy. Okay. Temperate regions. That's where we are. Temperate regions have light that's available from mid-spring to mid-fall. Okay, and then nutrients are available from mid-fall to mid-spring. Okay, during the winter. So where do those two overlap? Fall and spring, right? So you would expect there to be a bloom in the spring and in the fall, right? And that's exactly what you see. So spring and fall. And then in temperate regions, you'll have a little bit of a different blooming pattern depending on if there's upwelling or not. So copy this down, and then I'm going to show you the picture. And the picture that I will draw for you, or that is there, is like 2 in 1. Okay, and that's actually the answer to your last 2 questions on your homework. Okay, this next drawing. All right. Can I switch the slide? Okay. So here's the deal. This red line right here, okay, this is what happens in the temperate regions without upwelling. Okay, so nutrients become available and light becomes available in the spring. Okay, and so you get this big bloom of phytoplankton in the spring. During the summer, you get a seasonal thermocline that forms, which traps some of the nutrients in the deep sea. So the bloom drops off. Still, the phytoplankton population still remains higher than it is in the winter, but it's less than the big bloom in the spring. Okay, and then again, once that thermocline breaks down and you get more nutrients available in the fall, you get a little bit of a bloom in the fall, and then it drops off for the winter. That's what happens in the temperate regions without upwelling. Okay, with upwelling, here's what happens. Okay, it's the blue line. So you get a big bloom in the spring because there's upwelling, a thermocline doesn't form, so you get nutrients available all summer. Population remains high all through the summer, and then when light drops off, so does the phytoplankton population. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe so? Okay, so that's your 2 in 1 graph. Yes, the blue line is the one with upwelling, and the red line is the one without upwelling. Well, I just traced over the green ones so you could see the difference between the two. Okay. Okay, so we're going to look at some of our different phytoplankton phylums. Okay, there's 4 phytoplankton phylums that we're going to look at. You have Cyanophyta, Chrysophyta, Haptophyta, and Dinophyta. You looked at 3 of these during your lab, right? You looked at Cyanophyta, those are the blue-green algae. Okay, you looked at Chrysophyta, those are the diatoms. And then you also looked at the Dinophyta, the dinoflagellates. Okay, so you've seen 3 of these under the microscope already. We divide phytoplankton into their phylums based on 2 things. Number 1, their pigments, what pigments they have. And then number 2, how they store their sugars. So based on those 2 things, we divide them into phylums. Okay, the first phylum are the blue-green algae, okay, the cyanophytes. These guys are typically found out in the open ocean away from places where there's lots of nutrients. So by the equator out in the open ocean. They are special because they are nitrogen fixers. What does that mean? Well, basically, all living things need nitrogen as an essential nutrient because nitrogen is part of amino acids, which form proteins. Okay, and so all proteins in your body have nitrogen in them. And most of the nitrogen on Earth is found in the form of nitrogen gas. Okay, that is a form that is not usable to living things. So nitrogen fixers actually take that nitrogen gas, which is unusable, and converts it into ammonia, which is a usable form. Okay, so there's very, very few things on Earth that actually have this ability to be able to fix nitrogen, and blue-green algae are one of them. Kind of cool. Okay, and so they actually allow for life to exist because they fix nitrogen. Does that make sense? Okay. Diatoms. Okay, diatoms have cell walls that are made out of silica or glass. Okay, they have glass cell walls. And their glass cell walls are made out of two pieces that fit together perfectly, and we call it a frustule. It's called a frustule. And they don't dissolve easily, clearly, because it's glass, and we put water into glass because it doesn't dissolve and it holds water well, right? So their frustule does not dissolve easily, which has some implications for their reproduction, which I will talk about in just a moment. But there are three major types, shapes of diatoms, and you saw these in your lab. The centric, okay, which are the round triangles or squares, chains, okay, which is the middle one, a bunch of them joined together, and then the pennate, which is at the bottom. They're the long and skinny ones. Okay. So reproduction in diatoms, because they have this glass cell wall that's so hard to kind of deal with, it doesn't dissolve easily, and it's not like you can grow and make your glass cell wall bigger. Okay, they actually have to have a special form of reproduction in order to deal with this. So they have both two forms of reproduction. They have asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Here's what happens. So you've got your original cell over here, okay, and when that cell divides, each of the daughter cells gets half of that frustule. You see that? So when this divides, this cell gets the red half, this cell gets the green half. You see that? Okay. When they divide, a diatom always produces the smaller half of the frustule. Okay, so when this cell divides, the one that gets the red half, it produces the smaller half of the frustule, and this one is the same size as this one. You see that? Okay, however, the one that gets the smaller half, the green half, it produces the smaller piece of the frustule, and so now this cell is smaller than that one. You see that? Now when this one divides, okay, one gets the smaller piece, and it creates, again, the smaller piece that fits inside of it, and so now this cell is smaller than this cell, which is smaller than that one. You see that? And it divides again, and it gets the smaller piece again, okay? And so now this cell is smaller than this one, smaller than this one, okay? So eventually, as diatoms divide, some of the cells get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. You see that? Okay. So once those cells get too small, they switch to sexual reproduction. Here's what happens. That little cell actually, instead of dividing asexually, forms gametes, eggs and sperm. Okay? And then it will release those gametes into the water, and another gamete from another diatom that's nearby doing the same thing will come. They'll fuse, form the zygote. That will grow back into the original size cell, and then that cell will go through the asexual reproduction phase again. Does that make sense? So they have both sexual and asexual phases of life. Cool, huh? All in a single-celled plant. Weird. Haptophyta. Haptophyta are coccolithophores. Okay, they are central in in central parts of the ocean and in polar regions. And they're called coccolithophores because they make these little things called coccoliths. Okay, they are these little plates right here. Okay, so each of those little things is called a coccolith. It's made of calcium carbonate, limestone, okay, like chalk. Okay, think of like chalk. And they form these little coccoliths inside their little single cell, and then they push it to the outside of their cell and form the cell wall surrounding them. And it looks like this. This is the electron scanning microscope image, so you can see the detail. This up here, you can see the little green part right there. Okay, that's the actual living part of the cell. And then this kind of fuzzy stuff around there, that's the cell wall made out of the coccolith. Yes, Harrison. So their coccoliths are made out of calcium carbonate, white, chalky stuff, okay? And again, these don't dissolve very easily in water either. So what happens is when they die, their coccoliths settle to the bottom and can become compacted. If there's enough of them that fall to the bottom, they become compacted. And then through tectonic activity, they can be raised back up above water and will form formations like this, the White Cliffs of Dover, okay, in England. The White Cliffs of Dover are made from two types of plankton, phytoplankton. One of those types is coccolithophores. So plankton make up the White Cliffs of Dover. Also, because coccolithophores, their shells are white, when they bloom, you can actually see it from space because they change the color of the water. So you can see like the little lighter patch right there. That's a coccolithophore bloom. So they change the color of the water. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's cool. That's a lot of phytoplankton. Okay, dinoflagellates. Okay, dinoflagellates. You saw some dinoflagellates for your lab, and dinoflagellates are pretty cool. How many of you have ever seen a red tide? You've seen a red tide? Okay. So that's when you go to the beach and the water looks kind of red, okay, because of these dinoflagellates. So when they bloom, when they have an explosive population growth, dinoflagellates have a red pigment in them. They look red. So when there's lots of them, they actually change the color of the water and the water looks red. How many of you have gone to the beach during a red tide at night? Have you seen the waves glow? Okay. So the waves glow. So when certain kinds of dinoflagellates will do this process that we call bioluminescence. So they produce light. And when they get disturbed, they produce light. So at night, you can actually see the waves glowing. Let me show you a short little video here of yes, these typically happen during the summer. So let's fast forward here. So these are people surfing during the red tide. And you can see the waves glowing. See the blue? Okay, those are the dinoflagellates producing that light. So yeah, see that? Isn't that awesome? And you can see like when the waves crash, it glows. So you can see it from the shoreline. You can see the waves glow. Isn't that cool? It does light up the sharks and stuff too. So pretty awesome. No, during the summer, it'll happen. Okay, because that's when you get the blooms of phytoplankton. Some of these dinoflagellates can also produce toxins. So, and they can actually, because they can produce toxins through this process that we call biomagnification, they can actually kill you. Okay, so here's the process of biomagnification. Basically, each little dinoflagellate produces a toxin. Okay, and biomagnification takes the toxin that gets produced, and each step in the food chain, the amount of toxin gets concentrated as you move up. Okay, so it gets concentrated about 10 times more every time you move up the food chain. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm handing you a paper clip if you're like in the front couple of rows. Okay, so you guys are going to be my dinoflagellates, and this paper clip represents the toxin that you produce. Okay, so sure. Okay, so you guys are my dinoflagellates. You guys produce toxins. Okay, and so let's say that Madison and Tasia are my mussels, and they're going to eat some of my dinoflagellates. And when they eat them, the toxins that are in the dinoflagellates get passed to them. So pass back your toxins, your paper clips, to you get more. Yeah, you're going to get a bunch because you're going to eat a bunch of phytoplankton, right? Madison, how many do you have? Okay, good. Okay. So Tasia eats more apparently. Okay, and so now let's say Cody goes to a restaurant and he eats those phytoplankton, or sorry, not the phytoplankton, the mussels. So pass your toxins on to Cody. Okay, so now Cody, farther up in the food chain, okay, he has all of the toxins now in him, and so now they're at a high enough concentration where they can actually do him harm. Does that make sense? It doesn't kill the mussels because they don't get a high enough concentration, but when you eat the mussels, then you get sick. Okay, and so you can get what's called amnesic shellfish poisoning or paralytic shellfish poisoning, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Amnesic shellfish poisoning, you get amnesia from eating shellfish. Paralytic shellfish poisoning, it causes paralysis of nerves, and both can kill you. Okay, yeah, if you eat and get enough of this toxin in your body. Record this. So what happens is we actually have this thing called the Mussel Watch Program, where scientists monitor the health of the mussels and make sure that they are the mussels that are going to the restaurants and stuff are fine for you to eat. It's shellfish. So mussels, clams, oysters, anything really that's a filter feeder, that will happen to. So we monitor that. So it's very, very rare that if you go to a restaurant, you'll get one of these mussels. Yeah, it'd be like people that go to the shoreline in order to collect the mussels and then go home and cook them. And if you go to the shore and you see a sign like this, that means those mussels are poisonous. Don't eat them. Okay? So if you ignore that, you can get sick. And if you do eat a mussel or something, a shellfish that is toxic, has the toxins in it, you will start to feel like your lips will start to tingle and your fingertips will start to tingle, and then you get super sick. Like you get diarrhea, you get shaking, you get disorientation. Depending on the amount of toxins, you may, start having trouble with your heartbeat, and it paralyzes the nerves that go to your diaphragm, and it stops you from breathing, and you die. So that takes a little while. But if you eat it and your fingertips and your lips start to tingle, go to the hospital right away. Yeah, they can save you because they'll put like a tube down your throat, right, and breathe for you. So then you'll be fine and your body will work the toxins out eventually. So, yeah. Okay. So these do affect marine animals. So these blooms of toxic phytoplankton do affect marine animals. But the higher level of the food chain, right, that are eating the things that have more toxins in them because of biomagnification. So it's going to affect things like birds, seals, and sea lions. And it's also going to, like, dinoflagellates will affect whales, dolphins, seals, and sea lions as well. And you'll see they'll be like very disoriented. They'll look sick and like have all sorts of problems. And it's probably because they got sick with this domoic acid poisoning. Okay, so this is pictures of red tides. Okay, so this picture on the left here, this is a dinoflagellate bloom, a red tide that's not toxic. Okay, and then this one on the right, okay, this is a toxic dinoflagellate bloom. Okay, also a red tide. When you get dinoflagellates blooming that do have toxins, we call it a harmful algal bloom. Okay, so you'll see that HAB, harmful algal bloom. That's toxic phytoplankton. Okay. Yeah, I mean, because they're different species, they have different pigments, so they look different colors. But you won't always just be able to tell like that.